Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 17th episode of the iDebate server. I'm the moderator for tonight's debate, and the topic will be, does the Kalam cosmological argument demonstrate the existence of a theistic God? Arguing in the affirmative is the iPhone user and budding Christian apologist Adon, and arguing in the negative is another iPhone user and recreational theist provocateur KingXerxes. Each debater will be given a 5-minute opening argument. After each debater has given their opening, they will have 10 minutes to rebut their opponent. After the rebuttals, they will have 20 minutes of open dialogue, asking each with as minimal interruptions as possible. After the dialogue, they will both offer a 5-minute closing. This will conclude the debate, at which point we will allow audience members to connect and ask questions to the debaters. The debaters will only answer questions they are directly asked. So if you wish to hear both people answer, make sure to address them both. The Q&A will last 30 minutes. After this 30 minutes has expired, the recording will stop, so any further discussion between the debaters or the audience will not be included in the YouTube upload. The rules are quite simple. The debaters will not be allowed to go over time during the opening, or they will be muted. The rebuttal, however, will be given 15 to 20 seconds of overlap, since the debaters will likely be creating it as we go along. The open dialogue will be as free as possible, and while the debaters are restricted from directly insulting one another at any point in time during the exchange, profanity will not be censored as long as it's not used gratuitously. If the conversation between the debaters becomes incoherent, I, the moderator, will intervene to bring back at the point at hand. The closing will also last no more than 5 minutes, or the debater will be muted. During each phase of the debate, I will let the debaters know when they have 1 minute left, 30 seconds left, 10 seconds left, and if they're still talking after their time expires, they will be muted and we will move on to the next phase. The audience is allowed to utilize the debate text chat to fact check the debaters and deliberate the topic amongst themselves. However, you will not be allowed to connect until the Q&A, at which point a queue will be initiated for you to join if you wish to ask a question. If both debaters understand and agree to the rules, we will go ahead and begin. Adon, since you're arguing in the affirmative of the motion this evening, you will be given your opening argument first. You may start whenever you're ready.
I am ready. Hello and thank you all for coming to this debate today on this wonderful day. Today I'll be defending the Kalam cosmological argument in its entirety, not only in the core syllogism but also in the implications of the conclusions which lead us to a theistic God. I'll now present to you the core syllogism of the Kalam cosmological argument. 1. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. 2. The universe began to exist. Therefore, the conclusion 3. The universe has a cause. The first premise is supported not only philosophically but scientifically, as the second law of thermodynamics states that something cannot come from nothing in the context of the universe. It is also that if we were to deny premise 1, there are numerous amount of implications this would have, as if something would come to being uncaused and would essentially as it would have no cause to speak of. If so, then it is to come into being from nothing, which I'm sure very little of you will argue. But if this is possible, then it becomes inexplicable as to why everything cannot come from nothing, as why is this one thing the exception to the rule that seemingly every other thing we know of applies to. If there is no reason as to the exception of this object, then there is no reason as to why it should question if you were hit in the face by a soccer ball this very moment. That's simply popping to existence inside of your house. My last and final point for this is that it is constantly validated and has never been disproven. It has been validated an uncountable amount of times through induction, and we've seen that even if denial of all the points I mentioned, we can with certainty say at the very least it is certainly more plausible than its counterarguments. I would also like to point out that although the first premise is completely valid, it can simply be changed to if the universe began to exist, the universe had a cause. This saves a lot of time debating things such as virtual particles, which are commonly claimed to come from nothing but in reality do not, and only come from a vacuum, which in layman's is nothingness but in physics is defined as a low energy space. The second premise, albeit far more controversial, stands nearly as strong as the first premise, as we have not only scientific evidence for this, but also philosophical evidence against the eternity of the universe and infinitude of the past. Naming a few scientific theories in support of this is Einstein's theory of general relativity. This is because Einstein's equation, which is now essential in modern day physics, simply cannot be true in an eternal static model of the universe, as for that to happen, Einstein's equation must be fudged in a way that would offset the gravitational effect of matter. The second scientific theory in support of this is the Feynman-Leiter model, which, if correct, can no longer adequately be treated as an eternal and static universe, but rather it must have a history. The third scientific evidence for this is that I will present today is in fact a quote from Stephen Hawking himself on Hawking.com, which, and I quote, "But if your theory disagrees with the second law of thermodynamics, it is in bad trouble. In fact, the theory that the universe has existed forever is in serious trouble with the second law of thermodynamics. The second law states that disorder always increases with time, like the argument about human progress, and indicates that there must have been a beginning. Otherwise, the universe would be in complete disorder right now, and everything would be at the same temperature in an infinite and everlasting universe. Every line of sight would end on the surface of a star. That would mean that the night sky would be as bright as the sun." Stephen has a lot to say about this, but for the sake of the introduction and for the sake of time, I will not get into that unless further questions arise. This is lastly supported philosophically as an eternal and thereby infinite in time and infinite regress would cause a numerous amount of problems as described within Hilbert's Hotel and the Grim Reaper paradox. Finally, a short and sweet explanation of why the universe must have begun to exist would be that if it didn't, there must therefore have been an infinitude of time, but you cannot transverse an infinite amount of time in order to get to the present, or in B theory, T1. Last but not least, if acceptance of the first two premises, the conclusions is unavoidable. I would also like to say a common objection of this is putting out that the B theory of time, and in claiming that the B theory of time beginning to exist is a completely incoherent term. I deny this, as it can simply be explained as X begins to exist at T, or
1
time.
minute left.
If one exists at T, if one X exists at T, and two, there is no moment earlier than T at which X exists. Under this, we see the beginning to exist a completely coherent term in time, coherent time inside of the B theory of time, coherent term. There are numerous amount of implications that this would have, such as that the cause of the universe must be beginningless, changeless, immaterial, timeless, spaceless, enormously powerful, but that it must also be an agent. I will
30
not
seconds.
yet get into that for the sake of time in the introduction. I will, although, happily explain how this would have these implications if the first two premises are accepted, and so is the conclusion. He can go now. I'll present it.
All right, that concludes Adon's opening debate. Xerxes, whenever you're ready.
Okay, yeah, I'll go. Let me go up here real quick. Okay, first, I'd like to begin by once again reviewing the premises of the Kalam cosmological argument. Premise 1, everything which begins to exist has a cause. Premise 2, the universe began to exist. Conclusion, therefore the universe has a cause. Perhaps you noticed the same thing I did, which is that God is not mentioned in either of the two premises or the conclusion. How can an argument which doesn't conclude a God exists be a demonstration that a God exists? Well, it can't. My opponent presents this argument as a springboard from which to launch into an entirely separate argument regarding the necessary nature of whatever caused the universe, which has nothing to do with the Kalam itself. Even if I were to grant both premises and the conclusion, all this argument would demonstrate is that the universe is a cause. Take a similar syllogism, for example. All humans are mortal. Ben Affleck is human. Conclusion, therefore, Ben Affleck is mortal. This argument follows the same if this, then that model as the Kalam, and it reaches a conclusion using the same deductive method. However, based on this argument, we can discern nothing about whether or not Ben Affleck is currently dead, or how he died, or how he will die if he hasn't already. Similarly, the Kalam does not offer us any additional knowledge as to what caused the universe. Indeed, the Kalam does not demonstrate the existence of any God, even if the premises were 100% correct. Yet, I would contend the premises aren't correct. I would contend that they're not just wrong assertively, they are wrong categorically. To quote Sean Carroll, asking what caused the universe is like taking a picture with an iPhone and asking, well, where did the film go? It's not that the question is particularly difficult or scrutinous, it's that it isn't even the right question to ask. So how do the premises fail? Let's take a look at the first. Everything which begins to exist as a cause. This premise seems intuitively true, but it fails for a very simple reason. We don't know everything. We cannot possibly positively affirm everything which begins to exist requires a cause, especially when talking about the universe, because we haven't analyzed the beginning of every, quote, thing. The premise is employing conventional language to explain an aspect of cosmology that very few people on this planet can even comprehend, and that in itself is enough to dismiss it outright. The use of the word begin in premise 1 is necessarily different than the use of the word begin in premise 2. How so? Because premise 1 is referring to everything which exists within the universe. Imagine any object at this moment. Consider that the fundamental particles which compose suppose that object have existed for as long as the universe has. According to the first law of thermodynamics, matter and energy cannot be created or destroyed. So the, quote, things, quote, that we observe as having begun are simply the same fundamental particles transposing into a new structure. I began to exist 26 years ago, but the components of my being have existed for much longer than that. They just reassembled into me at this particular point in time. In contrast, in the second premise, the universe began to exist is necessarily implying that there was in fact nothing antecedent to the beginning of the universe, that it was seemingly materialized out of a vacuum without the pre-existence of the material we see inside the universe. So clearly the operation of cause and effect within the universe does not apply outside, regardless of your conclusion. The idea that our intuitions about cause and effect that we get from the everyday experience of our insignificant portion of the world should somehow be extended without modification to the fundamental nature of reality is fairly absurd. Furthermore, this premise implies the existence of time before the universe existed, which makes absolutely no sense because time is the measurement of events. If there are no events to be measured, then how could time exist? Similarly, if distance didn't exist, what would be the meaning of a mile? Once again, we have an insurmountable category error in an attempt to describe an incredibly mature philosophical concept with the linguistic prowess of a high school earth science teacher. Not only does the Kalam fail to demonstrate the existence of a god if it were sound, the Kalam isn't sound. It's a grotesque oversimplification of the most profound question men have asked since our inception. That's my time.
All right, and with that, Adon, you are free to start your rebuttal.
All right. So my opponent claims that we have no evidence that anything outside of this universe truly that we cannot identify what this cause was or anything of the sort. I completely disagree, as conceptual analysis of what it is to be a cause of the universe enables us to recover a number of striking properties which this ultra-mundane cause must possess and which are of theological significance. For example, the cause must be uncaused, since we have seen an infinite of causes possible, be a Hilbert's Hotel or Grim Reaper paradox, or simply the argument against that I provided against the infinitude of time. One could, of course, arbitrarily posit a plurality of causes in some sense prior to the origin of the universe, but ultimately, if the philosophical Kalam argument are sound, this causal chain must terminate in a cause which is absolutely first and uncaused, there being no reason to perpetuate the series of events beyond the origin of the universe. Occam's razor, which enjoins us not to posit causes beyond necessity, strikes such further causes in favor of the immediate first cause of the origin of the universe. The same principle dictates that we are warranted in ignoring the possibility of a plurality of uncaused causes in favor of assuming the unicity of the first cause. I would also like to say that this must be the uncaused first cause, as we have no evidence of time existing prior to the universe, and it is completely incoherent to assume so, as time does depend on a numerous amount of things within this universe that simply it would be completely illogical to assume that these numerous amount of properties must exist also outside of the universe. Occam's razor also further strikes against this, as this has far more assumptions than my original, which I would say, at least, at the very least, even if not of all of my arguments so far presented for the uncaused first cause of the universe, would at least posit that my argument is far more likely than the counter arguments against it. The first cause must also be beginningless, since my contraption of premises one, whatever is uncaused does not begin to exist. Moreover, this cause must be changeless, since once more, an infinite temporal regress of changes cannot exist. We should not be warranted, however, in inferring the immutability of the first cause, since immutability is a model property that causes changelessness, and from we cannot affirm that it is incapable of change. But we can know that the first cause is changeless, at least insofar as it stands first. From the changelessness of the first cause, its immateriality follows. Whatever is material involves incessant cause change, or on at least the molecular and atomic levels. But the uncaused first cause exists in a state of absolute changelessness. Given some relational theory of time, the uncaused cause must therefore also be timeless, sans the universe, since in the utter absence of events, time would not exist. It is true that some philosophers have argued persuasively that time could continue to exist if all events were to cease, but such arguments are inapplicable in the case at hand, since where we are envisioning not the cessation of events, but the utter absence of any events whatsoever. In case, the timelessness of the first cause, since the universe can be more directly affirmed from the finitude of the past. Given that time had a beginning, the cause of the beginning of time must also be timeless. It follows that this cause must also be spaceless. It is both immaterial and timeless, and no spatial entity can be both immaterial and timeless. If an entity is immaterial, it could exist in space only in virtue of being related to material space, but then it cannot be timeless, externistic change in its relation to material things. Hence, the uncaused first cause must transcend both time and space and be the cause of their origination. Such a being must be, moreover, enormously powerful since it brought the entirety of a physical reality, including all matter, energy and space-time itself, into being without any material cause. Finally, and most remarkably, such a transcendent cause is plausibly taken to be personal. Three reasons can be given for this conclusion. First, as Richard Swinburne points out, there are two types of causal explanation: scientific explanations in terms of cause and initial conditions, and personal explanations in terms of agents and their volitions. Or each is a perfectly legitimate form of explanation. Indeed, in certain contexts, it would be wholly inappropriate to give one rather than the other. Now, first state of the universe cannot have a scientific explanation. There is nothing, and therefore it cannot be accounted for in terms of laws operating on initial conditions. It can only be accounted in terms of an agent and his volitions, a personal explanation. Second, the personhood of the first cause is already powerfully suggested by the properties which have been deduced by the means of our conceptual analysis. For there appear to be only two candidates which can be described as immaterial, beginningless, cause time, spaceless being, either abstract objects or an unembodied mind. Abstract objects were sets, propositions, proportions, and properties very typically construed by philosophers who include such things in their ontology as being precisely the sort of entities which exist timelessly and spaciously. Similarly, philosophers who hold the possibility of disembodied mind describe such mental substances as immaterial and spaceless, and there seems no reason to think that a causal mind might not also be a beginningless and uncaused. No other candidates which could be suitably described as immaterial, beginningless, uncaused, timeless, and spaceless beings come to mind, nor has anyone else to any other such candidates, but no sort of abstract objects can cause the universe, for abstract objects are not involved in causal relation. Even if they were, since they are not agents, they cannot volitionally exercise causal power to do anything. If they were causes, they would be so not as agents, but as mindless events or states. They cannot be event causes; they do not exist in time and space. Even if we allow that some abstract objects exist in time, for example, propositions which stands their truth value and virtue of the tense of the sentences which expresses them, still in view of their abstract nature, it remains utterly mysterious as how they can be causally related to concrete objects so as to bring about events including the origin of the universe. Nor could they be state causes of states involving concrete objects, for the same reason, not to mention the fact in the case at hand, we are not talking about the state causation, that is, the causal dependence of one state on another, but what would amount to state event causation, namely the universe come to being because of the state of some abstract objects, which seems impossible. Thus, the cause of the universe must be an unembodied mind. Third, this same conclusion is also implied by the fact that only personal free agency can account for the origin of the first temporal effect from a changeless cause. We have concluded that the beginning of the universe was the effect of a first cause. By the nature of the case, that cause cannot have any beginning of nor any prior cause, nor can there have been any changes in this cause, either in its nature or operations prior to the beginning of the universe. It just exists changelessly without beginning, and a finite time ago brought the universe into existence. Now, this exceedingly odd, the cause in some sense eternal, and yet the effect which is produced is not eternal, but began to exist a finite time ago. How can this be? If the necessary and sufficient conditions for the production of the effect are eternal, then why is the effect eternal? Then why is the effect not eternal? How can all causal conditions sufficient for the production of the effect be changelessly existing, and yet the effect not also existing along with the cause? How can the cause exist without the effect? One might say that the cause came to exist or changed in some way prior to the event. But then the cause of the beginning or changing would be the first event, and we must all exist cause. We must all over again ask for its cause. And this cannot go on forever, for we know that a beginning of a series of events cannot exist. There must be an absolute first event before which there was no change, no previous event. We know that this first event must have been caused. The question is, how can a first event come to existence? The cause of that event exists changelessly and eternally. Why isn't the effect co-eternal with this cause? The best way out of this dilemma is agent causation, whereby the agent freely brings about some event in the absence of prior determining
1 minute.
Because the agent is free, he can initiate new effects by bringing about conditions which are not previously present. Also, it is completely fine within my argument about the changing of as the first law of thermodynamics, as the change between the quote-unquote change between the first premise and the second premise is not in fact colloquially fallacious, as I would
30 seconds.
As I would state that it is that we can even say that it applies outside of the universe, which is completely incoherent, as the first law of thermodynamics is only in this universe and therefore cannot be applied outside of the universe. And even if admitted so, it can be simply just put into
10
a
seconds.
change of matter, such as God's energy, thereby cause the universe by transforming in and of itself. I'm done.
Am I good to go?
Sorry about that. Yeah, you're free to go.
Okay. My opponent repeatedly asserts that the universe demands a cause. Why should we expect that there are causes or explanations or a reason why we live in the universe which we live? It's because the physical world inside of which we're embedded has two important features. There are unbreakable patterns, laws of physics, things don't just happen, they obey the laws, and there is an arrow of time stretching from the past to the future. The entropy was lower in the past and increases towards the future. It's the second law of thermodynamics. Therefore, when you find some event or state of affairs today, we can very often trace it back in time to one or more couple possible predecessor events that we therefore call the cause of all that, which leads to that event according to the laws of physics. But crucially, both of these features of the universe that allow us to speak the language of causes and effects are completely absent when we talk about the universe as a whole. We don't think that our universe is part of a bigger ensemble that obeys laws, even if it's part of the multiverse. The multiverse is not part of a bigger ensemble that obeys laws. Therefore, nothing gives us the right to demand some sort of external cause. My opponent claimed that there are implications of the Kalam outside of the universe having a cause. That's simply not true. The Kalam cosmological argument is a very simple syllogism. The universe, everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. The universe has a cause. Even if those premises were sound, it does not get us any closer to a God, let alone a God who is personal. The second law of thermodynamics, unlike what my opponent claimed, does not produce any challenges for the causation of the universe, and it does not support linear causality. The entropic beginning that my opponent talked about, which he identified as the beginning of the universe that scientists talk about, is not actually a beginning of the universe. It is the entropic beginning of the universe. An entropic beginning happens in the middle of an event, not at the beginning, because you have a period of low entropy, which descends and descends and descends, and then you have the entropic beginning, which is where the entropy begins to increase, and that's where we see the interaction of the material around us in the world. He relies heavily on intuition, repeatedly equivocating the use of the word begin, because he attempts to use the word begin as we know it within the universe, which is the transposition of pre-existing physical material, and he takes that word begin and he uses it for the universe, which would not be the transposition of pre-existing material, because as he himself admitted, his God would have created the universe using no pre-existing material. He would have created it, quite frankly, out of nothing. The second law of thermodynamics does not apply to non-isolated systems either, and the universe is not an isolated system. It is accumulation of systems, and it is so vastly expansive that as so long as entropy decreases in one part of the universe, it's perfectly understandable that it would increase in another. For example, on our world, on Earth, entropy is constantly decreasing, but we know that this is okay because the sun, which is what primarily sources the energy of our planet, is increasing in entropy, and this is going to be created in an unstable reaction in the next billion or so years. And we can measure this mathematically. Furthermore, my opponent brings up the problem of infinite regress, which is not solved by the existence of a God, let alone a theistic God, because a theistic God is a God of the mind. Minds require time because minds are generations of thoughts. If God never changes his mind or makes any decisions, he wouldn't be personal, he wouldn't be an agent. The moment that God decided to create the universe, that required time. When he began doing that action, creating the universe, that required time. And when he stopped doing that action, that also required time. We are supposed to believe that this mind, this disembodied incorporeal agency, existed for eons without being part of any larger structure, which violates everything that we know to be true about the inside of our universe. But it would be dishonest of me to apply the rules of what happens inside of our universe to what may or may not be possible outside of the universe, if outside of the universe is even a logical concept. Yet my opponent does not have that reservation. He repeatedly and fallaciously applies what our intuitions about the rules inside of the universe to how the universe would operate externally, which is preposterous. Cause and effect are intuitive observations based on our understanding of linear time within the confines of our universe, because time is the measurement of material events. So it cannot be used to apply to something that would have happened outside. It wouldn't have been a cause. It wouldn't have been a beginning. It would be similar to asking, what does the color blue smell like? It is illogical. It doesn't construct any coherent meaning in the way that we think so, because space-time breaks down the further back we go to the Big Bang. He defined his God as being spaceless, timeless, and immaterial, creating the universe out of effective nothing. But if I were to reword his definition, I would say that he exists nowhere for no time and is made of nothing, which would make his God indistinguishable from something that doesn't exist at all. And if I can't distinguish your God from a God that doesn't exist at all, I have no reason to believe your God exists, and your argument fails. He also makes the baseless assertion of personability. There's no reason to believe that if a God exists, it's a God that has a personality or a mind or an agency. Perhaps you could use the word God just to describe the eternal component of the universe that allows it to exist. Unfortunately, we have no method of evaluation for that prospect. Fifth, and most importantly, theism fails as an explanation. Even if you think that the universe is caused and you don't think that naturalism can solve it, theism certainly does not. Because if you thought it did, if you played the game honestly, what you would say is here is the universe that I expect to exist under theism. I will compare it to the data and see if it fits. Well, what kind of universe would we expect? Well, you would expect a universe that has a bigger significance than it does when it comes to life. So, for example, the amount of tuning, which is something that my opponent brought up about the physical constants of our universe and how they seem to interact in such a way to permit our existence. If you thought that the physical parameters of our universe were tuned in order to allow life to exist, you would expect just enough tuning, but not too much. Under naturalism, a physical mechanism could far overtune by an incredibly large amount that has nothing to do with the existence of life, and that is exactly what we observe. For example, again, my opponent brought up the early entropy of the universe, and the early entropy of the universe is much, much, much higher than what would be necessary for the existence of life, at least in the way that we know life to be, carbon-based life forms. You would expect under theism that the particles and parameters of particle physics would be enough to allow life to exist and have some structure that was designed for some reason, whereas under naturalism, you'd expect them to be kind of random and a mess. And guess what? They're kind of random and a mess. You'd expect under theism for life to play a special role in the universe. Under naturalism, you would expect life to be very insignificant. I hope I don't need to tell you how life is insignificant as far as the universe is concerned. If the Earth were to blow up right now and everything died that was on Earth, the rest of the universe would be wholly unaffected by that and continue on as it has been for the last 14 billion years. Now, I know what you're possibly thinking. You're thinking that I can explain all of that. And I know you can explain all of that. So can I. It's not hard to come up with ex post facto justifications for why God would have done something this or that way. Why is it not hard? Because theism is not well defined. That's what computer scientists call a bug, not a feature. So moving on a little bit further, we have a bigger problem here, and that is the Kalam cosmological argument itself is what we're debating. The Kalam cosmological argument does not present a God as a viable conclusion. It presents a cause that they come to based on an equivocation of that word, which is a logical fallacy. And if a logical argument commits a logical fallacy, the argument cannot be sound. So when in premise 1, you have a word begin, and in premise 2, you have the same word, but they are not being used the same, as my opponent again repeatedly admitted. In the first premise, the word begin is being used in the way that we conventionally understand it within the confines of the universe. That is, the transposition of pre-existing physical material into a new structure. Whereas, in the second premise, he's using the word begin to mean the induction of something, the materialization of something without the use of pre-existing material, literally creating something out of nothing, creatio ex nihilo. That is not a viable option. That does not explain anything, and it is a logically fallacious argument that does not demonstrate the existence of the God that he claims to believe in, which is a personal God, a theistic God, and that's my time.
Okay, and that adds 3 minutes to the open dialogue, and you are free to begin open dialogue whenever both of you are ready.
I'm ready.
Okay, Adon, I have a question for you.
Yes, sir.
What does outside of the universe mean?
Outside of the universe?
Yes.
I would define outside of the universe as something that is not out, like inside the universe, and does not apply to the laws of the universe. Simply just the opposite of inside the universe.
So you think that the universe is part of a larger ensemble that obeys laws the same way that there are things inside the universe that obeys laws?
I don't think it obeys I don't assume any laws that it obeys to.
Okay, so then why do you demand a cause?
Why do I demand a cause? Because
Yes.
of the first two premises I've already explained.
But the first premise you explained, as I explained, is an equivocation fallacy. You say everything that begins to exist has a cause, except when you say everything that begins to exist, you are referring to things inside the universe. And then now you're trying to superimpose that upon the universe itself. And you have admitted yourself that the way you're using the word begin for the universe is different than the way you're using the word begin for the things that are inside the universe, which you describe as the word everything.
I don't believe I've ever admitted that, firstly. And secondly,
did God create the universe out of pre-existing physical material?
You can say he did. I have no problem with that.
You said in your rebuttal that he did not. You affirmatively stated that he did not create the universe out of anything.
What part did I say that?
Around the 7-minute mark.
Around the 7-minute mark. Can you provide context to what I said?
You were describing the characteristics of your God. You called him spaceless, timeless, immaterial, the uncaused cause of everything, and that he produced the universe into existence out of nothing. Well, you didn't say the word nothing. You said using no pre-existing material.
No pre-existing material. When did I say that?
Around the 7-minute mark of your rebuttal.
You mean when I described God as immaterial?
You said that he created the universe without using any pre-existing material.
I described him as immaterial. I don't believe saying that.
Okay, so did God create the universe out of pre-existing material, or did he not?
You can say yes, you can say no.
Well, where did he get the pre-existing material from then?
I have. You can say no as well. I have no problem with either of those.
That fails as an explanation, and it's completely incoherent. Did God use pre-existing material to create the universe? Yes or no?
No.
Okay, so then you are necessarily using the words begin completely differently in both premises. The argument fails.
No, the only way I am using begin in each and every single one of both of these can be described as X begins to exist at T if X exists at T and there is no moment earlier than T at which X exists. That is the way I'm using it.
Except that's not the way you're using it, because when you say everything begins to exist inside the universe, you were talking about the transposition of fundamental particles that restructure into a new component. So if I say my phone began to exist, I don't mean that it popped into existence out of an ether. I mean that there are components of the phone that were structured that pre-existed before the phone. The phone is an accumulation of properties, of atoms, of molecules, and of particles. But all of those things existed individually since the beginning of the universe. There was never a time where they didn't exist, so long as we can conceive. And they restructured to create the phone, in a sense. But when you say the universe began to exist, that is not the process you were talking about. You were saying that it was popped into existence out of nothing via the will of a disembodied mind.
I hope you realize that when I say in the first premise, every single thing that begins to exist has a cause, I included that also as the universe, which I claim to begin to exist as well. I am not specifically talking about what is inside of the universe, but I'm talking about the universe as a whole. The universe
you necessarily are, because you're using an inductive fallacy by saying that everything that begins to exist has a cause. The only thing you've ever observed to exist are things inside the universe. So your observation of things beginning is necessarily the transposition of physical material into a new structure. That is your only observation of things beginning to exist, because you are using the word begin very loosely, and it does not encompass how the universe originated. And it is something that a cosmologist would laugh in your face about. That's
fine, but I also do not only use observation as evidence for my first premise. I use a multitude of factors.
What is your evidence that everything begins to exist has a cause?
All right, time to read it again.
I don't reread your rebuttal. I'm just asking, just provide the evidence that everything begins to exist has a cause.
I'm only rereading the first part of my introduction. Let's. All right, so the first premise is supported not only philosophically but scientifically. Blah blah
No, it's
blah.
not.
Blah, blah.
Science does not support the proposition that everything which began to exist has a cause. First of all, science doesn't even appropriate the use of the word began that way.
What do you mean that way?
Because, like I said, you are using the word begin in two different vernaculars. One, you are using it to describe the transposition of pre-existing physical material into a new structure. So when you say everything which begins to exist, you are including things that exist at a quantum level which do not obey the conventional laws of physics. And so even they would not be applicable to that definition of the word begin. Because when we use the word begin, it is colloquial. It doesn't encompass things in the way that we understand time metaphysically.
I again stated that I am using both of these definitions in the sense that X begins to exist at T if X exists at T, and 2, there is no moment earlier than T at which X exists. That
Right.
is the definition I am using of
So-
begin to exist.
T wouldn't exist. If you're saying the universe began to exist, then you would have to imply that there was a time when time didn't exist, and now you've entered into a paradox and your argument fails again.
I don't think I need to imply a time where time doesn't begin to exist. I need to
Did
only
time
say
exist before the universe did?
No.
Then you're implying a time when time didn't exist, and your argument
No.
fails again.
I am claiming that the universe began to exist simultaneously with time. They existed both at the same time.
So then your definition doesn't work, because you're saying that the definition of begin is that X exists at T if X didn't exist before T. But if T doesn't exist itself, that doesn't work.
But
there would be no before. The concept of before wouldn't exist.
Sure, but even if we say that, then there is still no moment earlier that X exists. There is that is still factual. Even if you say that time did not exist before the universe, I would, which I also agree with, I would say that it is still completely logical as to say there is no moment earlier than T at which X exists.
A moment requires time. In order for there to be a moment, there has to be time to measure the moment. If there is no time, there are no moments. It's a logical concept, what you're presenting to me.
Exactly. So therefore, there is no moment in the first place.
So then therefore, there wouldn't be a cause, because if there is no time to exist prior to what you're talking about, it wouldn't have been caused. Because to cause something requires time. Cause is a verb.
Cause something requires time.
Yes.
That's simply solved by claiming that the cause went from atemporality to temporality, and the
that doesn't work either, because in order for the cause to start, there has to be time.
For the
you
cause
you,
to
you
start,
continue to perpetuate the problem of infinite regress, which is what you discussed in your rebuttal.
No, I don't say that cause existed eternally. I say it exists atemporally. Those are two different things. Eternally meaning existing forever within time, and atemporal means existing outside of time.
What does that even mean, to exist outside of time? To exist is also a verb. Existing is an action. It is an action that you perpetuate. It requires time.
Exist is a verb?
Yes.
I don't believe that. It exists.
Well, then you are just rejecting the definition of the word exist. What does it mean to exist, Adon?
Have objective reality or being.
Okay. To be is a verb. Do you recognize that to be is a verb?
All right. I didn't say to be. I'm saying having objective reality or being.
Yes, which requires time.
No, it doesn't.
If something is, then it is a thing. A thing is necessarily requiring of time. You can't exist outside of time. That doesn't make sense.
There are a numerous amount of things that don't exist outside of time.
Name one.
All abstract objects. Well, most of them at least.
Abstract objects are a generation of the mind. So they do exist within time, because if there was no mind to generate them, they wouldn't exist.
I completely disagree. Yes, I would think that idea exists.
You're welcome to disagree, but you would have to provide an argument as to why that's not the case. If all minds cease to exist, do abstract concepts remain?
Yes.
Okay, so 2 plus 2 equals 4, even if there is no mind to conceive a 2 or a plus or an equals or a 4?
Yes.
How?
Okay, so let's take this one step at a time. Would, for example, logic, that is an abstract object. Would logic exist regardless?
Logic isn't an object, it's a concept.
It's an abstract object.
It's not an object, it's a concept.
Logic is by definition an abstract object.
It's not an object, it's a concept. An object
An abstract concept, you can call it.
Adon, it is very important that we use correct words to describe what we're talking about. Because I'm already presenting that your argument commits an equivocation fallacy by using two different definitions of the same word.
I already respond to that. Why are you making the same claim twice?
Well, because you haven't responded sufficiently to it.
Well, I respond to it sufficiently, and then you went back while we made debate of why it is sufficient or insufficient. Okay, now can we get back to what we were talking about?
Well, that's what we were talking about, is whether or not the Kalam cosmological argument demonstrates the existence of a theistic God, and the premises of the Kalam cosmological argument commit an equivocation fallacy, and therefore the argument isn't sound. It doesn't demonstrate anything.
All right, fine. I'll respond to this again for the third time. It does not commit an equivocation fallacy because I am using the same definition each and every term, that being x begins to exist at t if x exists at t, and 2 there is no more earlier than ti which x.
That doesn't apply to the universe. You can't use that definition for the universe because there is no.
I'm going to interrupt here since I don't think this is going anywhere. Can you please move to a different aspect of the argument?
All right, sure. So you said something about that not being the Kalam cosmological argument describing the universe. I completely disagree, as that may be the core syllogism of the Kalam cosmological argument, but no one in modern day uses the core syllogism alone and continues to move on from that. And I'm not even attempting a fourth premise or a fourth conclusion or whatever you may claim to be. It's not another step of the Kalam cosmological argument. Stop right
there. You just said it's not another step of the Kalam cosmological argument. So you're admitting that the addendum you put on the end of the Kalam cosmological argument to argue for the existence of a spaceless, immaterial, timeless, anthropomorphic agent with a mind and goals, okay, that is not part of the Kalam cosmological argument. You just admitted that, did you not?
I said let me finish first of all. Let me finish my.
I'm going to stop you at the first point of disagreement. So you just admitted that the addendum that you put onto the end of the Kalam cosmological argument to jump to the theistic version of a god is not part of the Kalam cosmological argument.
I am saying it is not in the core syllogism of the Kalam cosmological argument. It is in the implications of the cause of the conclusion of the Kalam cosmological argument.
So it's not part of the Kalam cosmological argument.
That's not what I said.
Well, that's exactly what you're saying. You're just trying to add more words onto it to weasel out of the fact that you just lost the debate.
Sir, I don't think you're just ignoring what I said. I said that I'm not adding, simply saying that these are.
What is the conclusion of the Kalam cosmological argument?
The conclusion of the core syllogism is that the universe has a cause.
I didn't ask. What is the conclusion of the Kalam cosmological argument?
The conclusion of the core syllogism of the Kalam cosmological argument is that the universe had a cause.
Do you know what an argument is, Adon?
Yes.
What is an argument?
An argument is a logical.
That's kind of irrelevant. Can we please go back?
It's not. It's not, because he keeps equivocating a core syllogism in argument. When I say what is the conclusion of the Kalam cosmological argument, it is that the universe has a cause. That is the conclusion, because what he's saying after that point is not the Kalam cosmological argument.
I am only stating the implications of cause, no less. Am I not?
I don't care what you're stating the implications are. The implications are not part of the argument. They are an addendum.
Those are simply that is simply conceptual analysis of.
What are the implications of therefore Ben Affleck is mortal?
Whatever you can logically deduce from that.
Okay. And you're saying that you can logically deduce that because the universe is a cause, assuming that the premises are sound, that cause is spaceless, timeless, immaterial, and has thoughts, emotions, goals, and desires, and is the God of the Christian, or is a theistic God that cares about us personally. You're saying that's a logical jump from the universe as a cause.
I am saying that this is exactly my claim. So we stop right here about claiming this or you're claiming that or we're claiming this, right? I am only claiming that the cause of the universe is conceptual analysis. must not also be what is now what is considered a theistic God, but that the properties that it must have is that it is beginningless, changeless, immaterial, timeless, spaceless, enormously powerful, and an
So it
agent.
exists nowhere for no amount of time and is made of nothing.
It exists nowhere. Yes, it
For
exists
no amount of time
for no amount of time. Yes.
and is made of nothing.
Yep.
Okay, those are the exact characteristics of something that doesn't exist.
That is part of it. You can say that.
Okay, so I could say your God doesn't exist, and that's logically consistent.
No, I completely disagree. For
Well,
example, something
now you're
that
contradicting yourself.
No. Listen to me. Listen to me. I'm saying that those are properties of something that doesn't exist, but also that something that doesn't exist cannot cause some, and also cannot be enormously powerful. Right? Your thoughts on that? So, is there a response to that, or are we done?
I'm still waiting for the point where you justify any of these assertions that you're making, because your initial claim is that the Kalam cosmological argument provides a logical justification for asserting that there is in fact an immaterial, spaceless, timeless, anthropomorphic agent, a God that has thoughts, emotions, goals, and desires, and has a desire to interact with us personally. So far, you have provided absolutely no justification for that. You're just claiming that that's the case.
Firstly, all right. Firstly, the part after you claimed it was an agent is not a part of the Kalam cosmological argument.
So the God isn't an agent.
What? Do you know what an agent is?
Yeah, something with a mind.
Yes, exactly.
So God doesn't have a mind.
What? I never said that.
Okay, so but you just said he's not an agent. So if he's not an agent, then that means he doesn't have a mind.
He's an agent. He's an agent. I said every single point you said after an agent is not part of the what's called.
So God doesn't have thoughts, emotions, or goals.
You can say he has thoughts. You can say
Why do you keep responding to my questions that way? That's not what I'm asking.
what?
I'm asking for your claim, not what I can say. I know what I can say, that God is a penguin. That's beside the point. What is your claim about the nature of God, and how do you justify those claims?
Again, I've already listed the qualities for the Kalam cosmological.
I'm aware you listed the qualities. Now justify them.
Now justify them. That's what I said the whole 10-minute rebuttal, but
No, you didn't.
This is gonna be a while, so sit back, relax, get your pop. All right, all the way back to the properties of the first cause, which I explained about for about 10 minutes. From the first two premises, it follows logically that the universe has a cause. This is a staggering conclusion. Further implies the universe was brought to existence by transcendent reality. Conceptual analysis.
No, it doesn't. You stop. That stops right there. What do you mean by transcendent?
Not of the universe.
Okay. What do you mean by transcendent?
Not of the universe.
Okay. That the word transcendent doesn't always mean not of the universe. When you say not of the universe, what is it of? What are you applying there?
The qualities I've already listed.
Do you understand how you're using language that necessarily confines you to an understanding of the universe that doesn't allow for the conclusion that you're making?
No.
Okay. When you say something transcends the universe, what you are implying is that there is, in fact, something that the universe is embedded within, and it obeys certain structures, that it has an entirely different law of causality, that there are different operations by which the universe follows than what is in the universe. But then you simultaneously argue that the laws inside the universe apply to the universe itself.
The laws of thermodynamics apply to the universe. That's a fact.
The laws of thermodynamics are operations within the universe.
It also applies to
They apply to the processes that happen inside the universe.
That is true, but it also applies to the universe.
Can you quote the laws of thermodynamics?
Sure. Which part? The first law, the second law, what?
Pick one.
All right. The second law of thermodynamics states that the total entropy of an isolated system can never decrease over time and is constant if and only if all processes are reversible.
Okay. So how does that apply to the universe as a whole?
By stating that the total entropy of an isolated system can never decrease over time.
Is the universe an isolated system? It is entropy, not entropy.
Okay. Yes.
How? Can you demonstrate that?
Do you know what an isolated system is?
I'm very acutely aware of what an isolated system is. Your argument is necessarily implying that there are things outside of the universe, which would contradict the prospect that the universe is an isolated system. So if you're going to argue that the universe is an isolated system, you can't argue that a God exists. Pick one.
Why can't I?
Because God would be outside the universe, and therefore the universe wouldn't be isolated.
What? That just means that the universe is not inside of anything.
Okay, name an isolated system within the universe, then. Let's try it this way.
Within the universe,
Yes.
nothing is completely isolated because it's with.
So the second law of thermodynamics doesn't exist then, right?
What? I never said that.
If you say that there's nothing in the universe that's completely isolated, then the second law of thermodynamics would be completely unobservable, and we wouldn't have been able to ascertain that conclusion.
I'm saying that an isolated system is either a physical system so far from other systems that it does not interact with them. Which you can say that.
So does God interact with the universe?
He did once.
So the universe is not an isolated system. Congratulations. We can move on now.
Okay.
Is that okay? Are we moving on? Because
I'm waiting for him. I'm waiting for him to move on to a different topic.
To a different topic.
Like if he wants to address something in my rebuttal or not, because we've got another I think 10 minutes left.
No, we got a minute and 51 seconds.
A minute and 51 seconds left. Oh, okay. I mean, I guess we can go into the conclusions if Adon wants to yield this time there.
All right, sure.
Adon, do you want to yield and go into the conclusions?
Go into the conclusions?
Yeah.
What do you mean yield and go into the conclusions? What do you mean?
The concluding arguments. So each of us will get an additional 5-minute monologue to conclude our position.
Okay.
And Adam will go first, correct?
No, I will, because he went first for the opening.
All right.
I don't have much to say, but all right, whatever.
All right, so you got 5 minutes to.
Oh yeah, by the way, one last thing that happened. I would like to say that
Adon,
you said that.
Adon, we can continue that at the end of the debate. But after these conclusions, we're about to go into the Q&A, so the audience is going to get to interact with us. So let's save that for afterward.
Sure.
Am I ready to go, Sick?
Yes.
Okay. My opponent utterly failed to demonstrate that the Kalam cosmological argument is an effective proof of the existence of God, especially a theistic God. The Kalam cosmological argument follows two premises followed by a singular conclusion. Neither of the premises or the conclusion contain the word God or any implication of a God. That is a post hoc rationalization that he is attached to the end of that argument. It is a springboard. It is not a component of the argument. He repeatedly attempted to dodge this problem by wording it in such a way so that it would seem that the existence of a theistic God is a requisite of the Kalam cosmological argument. But in any case, it is not a component of the Kalam cosmological argument. It does not conclude with the Kalam cosmological argument. As a matter of fact, you could use the Kalam cosmological argument to conclude a non-theistic God as well. Or you could use it to conclude something that isn't a God at all. Something like just a universal pantheist, like Spinoza's a God. Just because the universe has a cause doesn't mean that it required an agency to cause it. That's an entirely separate argument that you would have to make, which is what my opponent attempted to do in the rebuttal. He tried to erect a different argument to argue that the cause of the universe requires an agency and whatnot, which would necessarily reinforce my point that the Kalam itself does not demonstrate the existence of a theistic God, even if the premises were sound, which I am adequately confident that I disproved the soundness of the premises. I did this two ways: by demonstrating that the premises commit a special pleading, or not a special pleading, a equivocation fallacy with the words begin, and by demonstrating that the first premise fails because it is an assertion of omniscience. It is impossible to know that everything which begins to exist has a cause. That is something that we intuitively infer based on our limited experience with the world around us. And we are now attempting to take that and apply it to the fundamental nature of reality without modification. And as I said previously, that is wholly absurd. Adon can go.
All right, Adon, time for your closing argument.
All right, my opponent claims that I commit a special equivocation, which I completely disagree, as I've provided that the definition of that both of these will be x begins to exist at t if one exists, x exists at t, and two, there is no more than t at which x exists. I believe equivocation fallacy, which he claims is incoherent, but because there is not time before the universe. But I'm saying that even if there is no actual moment t, then I would still say that that it is completely coherent that there is no moment earlier than t at which x exists, even if there is no moment earlier than t, period. That's completely coherent. And he also claims that he disproved it because it's intuitively true, but I completely disagree. As I provide a 3-point statement, a 3-point argument against it in my introduction. He also continues on to claim that my conceptual analysis of what properties the cause of the universe must have is actually what it is. But I'm saying that I'm not adding a fourth step to it. I'm simply saying the implications of cause be. I'm saying that if you analyze what cause must be, and if you truly take a look and put conceptual analysis and truly see what the way requires the cause of the universe, I'm saying that you can lead to a theistic God. No more, no less. It's not a fourth step. It's not another part of the cosmological argument. It's simply a conceptual analysis of the conclusion. That's it. No more, no less. I'm
Are
What
you
happened
there?
there? Did he just?
I don't
He
know.
got
Did he mute
muted.
himself?
I said I'm done.
Okay.
Okay. And then begins our Q&A. Xerxes, you'll set up the queue, right?
Yes, I will.
Oh.
Existence. I'm reading through the debate text chat because I was ignoring it for the point. Analytical mystic, you should talk to me about the good point that I made that you hadn't considered before, because I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. But the Q&A is about to start, guys. If you look at the queue chat, I'm gonna put one in there, and you just join the queue. The queue will automatically cycle. When you get on the queue, ask a question. Make sure you identify who you're asking the question to, and that way that only that person will answer. If you want to ask both of us a question, ask both of us a question. Okay? Fantastic. Let's do this thing. Okay. RIB looks like he's the first person up to ask a question.
All right.
Okay, so my question is for Adon, although Xerxes, if you want to kind of add like a comment on the end of it, you are more than welcome to do so. So Adon, could you please tell me if this statement is true or false? And if it is false, then if you could please explain why. Even if your arguments were accepted, all that it would do is prove that a God exists. You still have the challenge of proving that it is your personalized Christian God. Is that statement true or false? And if false, then please explain why.
That is completely true. The Kalam cosmological argument only argues for theistic, nothing less. That's true.
Okay.
Nothing to add there. Anybody else want to join the queue?
Well, this is active, isn't it?
There's more people in here to listen, so I guess nobody else wants to ask a question. Can you repeat slowly, Adon? I'm gonna go ahead and here. I'll just join the queue real quick. I'm gonna join the queue.
All right.
So I'm in the queue now. I'm gonna ask a question. Adon, can you very slowly repeat your definition of begin?
Of begin. All right, I will slowly repeat this once more. Give me a second to find it. Here you go. X begins to exist at t if 1, X exists at t, and 2, there is no moment earlier than t at which X exists.
So, did time exist before the universe?
No.
Okay, so then the universe cannot follow that definition of the word begin.
I disagree.
You just literally defined it as t being a requisite pre-ancestor to X. So if universe is X and t is time, and time doesn't exist before the universe, then the universe does not apply to that definition of the word begin.
I did not assume a prerequisite at all. I'm assuming you mean the second part. If you don't mean the second part, you can point it out. But I'm assuming you mean there is no moment earlier than t at which x exists. Even if there is no moment earlier at which t exists, period, that completely applies still, because there
No, it
still is
doesn't,
not
because if there is no time, moments is not a concept. That's illogical. In order for something to begin, it has to begin at a point of time. The universe would not have began at a point of time. The word "began" would not apply there, because the time and the universe are coming into existence simultaneously. That doesn't work.
Again, I'm saying that even if there is no moment earlier than t at which even t exists, that's all right. I think I need to type this in the chat because I don't think me saying it is really convincing here. So there is no moment earlier than t at which x exists, even if there is no earlier than t at which t exists. This is still completely possible. I said that nice and slow for the audience. There you go. I typed it out in chat.
All right, would anyone else like to join the queue?
No one else?
9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. You can go ahead and end the stream. Or end the recording, Esther.
All right, and that concludes our debate.
Fantastic.
That